The morning sun cast long shadows across the dome of the Capitol building before cascading down Pennsylvania Avenue like liquid gold. The light filtered through the windows of Capitol Cafe, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air and warming the polished wooden tables where Washington's power brokers gathered each morning to plot the day's political maneuvers. Emma Hayes moved with practiced grace between the tables, her slender frame navigating the morning rush with quiet efficiency. At 23, she carried herself with a dignity that belied her youth, her simple ponytail and minimal makeup a stark contrast to the carefully curated appearances of the politicos she served. Her blue eyes missed nothing, cataloging the rhythms and preferences of each regular customer with meticulous attention. Most people saw just another college graduate paying off student loans. They tipped without really seeing her, their attention fixed on smartphones and breakfast meetings. But Emma was more than a backdrop in their power plays. Her Georgetown political science degree remained unused in its frame, her career aspirations temporarily shelved by circumstances beyond her control. Marcus Wilson sat in his usual corner table, the morning light glinting off his military buzz cut as his fingers moved rapidly over his laptop keyboard. At 27, his broad shoulders and alert posture marked him as military even in civilian clothes. What most patrons never noticed was that Marcus couldn't hear their conversations or the gentle clatter of coffee cups. An IED in Afghanistan had taken his hearing 3 years ago, ending his career in military intelligence. Emma approached his table with a warm smile, her hands flowing into American Sign Language with fluid grace. "Good morning, Marcus. The usual today." His face brightened instantly, the permanent tension around his eyes softening. "Yes, please. Black coffee and blueberry muffin. How was your night?" Her hands danced through the air. "More research, more dead ends. Some days I wonder if I'll ever find the answers. 10 years is a long time, but records leave traces. We'll find something." Emma nodded, appreciating his quiet encouragement. For nearly a year, Marcus had been more than just a customer. He'd become an ally in her private mission, lending his intelligence background and analytical skills to her search for the truth about her parents' death. Robert Chandler stood just inside the doorway, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. At 33, he carried the confidence of someone accustomed to power his tailored charcoal suit and platinum watch, speaking of wealth beyond the comprehension of most patrons. His face bore the sculpted angles of old money and good genetics, his steel-gray eyes assessing the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who made multi-million-dollar decisions before breakfast. As CEO of Apex Energy Corporation, Robert had recently relocated to their new Washington headquarters to personally oversee their legislative agenda. The cafe had been recommended by Senator Jenkins as the place where real Capitol Hill business happened outside the formal halls of Congress. Robert noticed the young waitress signing with the military, the fluidity of her movements, suggesting she'd been using ASL her entire life. Something about her intense focus and the subtle intelligence in her expression caught his attention in a way that surprised him. He selected a table with a clear view of the cafe's operations and opened his briefcase. 3 lobbyists would be joining him shortly to discuss their strategy for the new energy bill, but he had arrived early to review the confidential briefing on Project Prometheus. Emma approached his table with professional courtesy, her customer service smile efficiently in place. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Capitol Cafe. Can I start you with coffee?" Robert looked up, noticing how her blue eyes assessed him with subtle wariness. "Black coffee, please. And perhaps your recommendation for breakfast. I'm new to the cafe." "The avocado toast with poached eggs is excellent. Chef Michael sources all ingredients locally." "That sounds perfect. Thank you." "Emma," she supplied, the professional smile never wavering. As she turned away, Robert returned to his documents, scanning the confidential environmental impact assessment for Project Prometheus. The massive water rights acquisition in Virginia would cement Apex's market dominance for decades, assuming they could navigate the regulatory hurdles and community opposition. Emma returned with his coffee, carefully placing it on the table. As she did, her eyes briefly registered the top sheet of his documents, noting the Apex Energy logo. A nearly imperceptible tension tightened her shoulders before she moved away to serve other customers. Robert's lobbyists arrived in staggered intervals, each nodding respectfully as they joined the table. The conversation quickly turned to Senator Gardner's wavering support for the energy bill amendments. "We need Gardner's vote. insisted Michael Whitman, Apex's chief lobbyist. Without it, the committee won't advance the permitting reforms we need for Project Prometheus. What's his price? Robert asked quietly. Environmental concessions in Northern Virginia. His daughter's running her campaign on clean water initiatives. He can't afford to be seen supporting anything that might compromise watershed protections. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Offer the expanded monitoring program we discussed. Full transparency, quarterly public reporting. It adds cost, but gives him political cover. None of them noticed Emma's efficient movements around them, refilling coffee cups while maintaining the practiced invisibility of service workers everywhere. None except Robert, who caught her subtle pause when Whitman mentioned water quality concerns. The cafe had emptied somewhat after the morning rush. Robert gathered his papers, slipping them into his briefcase when disaster struck. Emma, carrying a fresh pot of coffee, collided with another server, rounding the corner. Coffee splashed across Robert's table, soaking several documents before he could pull them away. "I'm so sorry," Emma gasped, immediately grabbing napkins and attempting to blot the spreading liquid. "Please let me help." Robert's initial flash of irritation faded as he saw genuine distress on her face. "It's fine, accidents happen. Your documents are ruined. I'll pay for any replacement costs." As she helped clean up the spill, Robert noticed her eyes briefly scan the partially visible heading of Project Prometheus before she looked away. The document itself was now illegible, but he wondered if she had seen enough to recognize what it was. "The suit will survive, but perhaps you could make it up to me by telling me how you learned sign language. I noticed you earlier with your friend." The question clearly surprised her. "My parents were both educators in the deaf community. I grew up bilingual in English and ASL." "That's remarkable. Most people never master a second language, let alone one as complex as ASL. Emma smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "My mother believed communication should never be a barrier to understanding. She taught deaf students for 20 years. And now are your parents still teaching?" The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a momentary tightening around her eyes before she composed herself. "They passed away 10 years ago. Car accident." "I'm sorry to hear that," Robert said genuinely. "That must have been difficult." "Life happens," Emma replied with practiced neutrality. "If you'll excuse me, I should get back to my other tables." Back at Apex headquarters, Robert sequestered himself in his office overlooking the Potomac. Instead of preparing for his board presentation, he found himself typing Emma Hayes into a search engine, then adding parents and accident to the query. The results were sparse but illuminating. A decade-old local news article detailed the tragic death of Thomas and Elizabeth Hayes in a single-car accident on a Virginia country road. Thomas Hayes, the article noted, had been an environmental scientist specializing in water quality assessment. Elizabeth Hayes had been a professor of deaf education at Gallaudet University. Robert stared at the grainy photo accompanying the article, recognizing Emma as the 13-year-old girl being comforted by social services workers. The article mentioned Thomas Hayes had recently lost his position with the Virginia Environmental Protection Department after controversial findings regarding industrial contamination of groundwater. A cold sensation settled in Robert's stomach as he searched the Apex database for any mention of Thomas Hayes. His security clearance as CEO gave him access to historical records few others could view. The search returned several flagged documents, all classified as legally privileged and dating back to his father's tenure as CEO. The first document was a legal memo discussing potential liability exposure from Hayes allegations. It referenced water quality reports submitted by Thomas Hayes that claimed dangerous chemical contamination from Apex's Virginia processing facility. The memo outlined strategies to discredit Hayes professionally rather than address the contamination claims directly. Robert's discomfort deepened as he reviewed internal correspondence showing the company had spent millions fighting Hayes's reports rather than investing a fraction of that amount to correct the alleged violations. More disturbing were the notations about making an example of Hayes to discourage other potential whistleblowers. The final document in the sequence chilled him completely. A handwritten note from his father, Richard Chandler, addressed to the head of security. "The Hayes situation must be resolved completely. Ensure there can be no connection to Apex. Use Blackwater if necessary." The note was dated 2 weeks before the fatal car accident. Robert leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with implications. His father had retired 5 years ago, and died of a heart attack last year, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. But the evidence suggested something far more sinister than corporate negligence. It suggested Apex, under his father's direction, might have been responsible for the accident that killed Emma's parents. The realization struck with physical force. The young woman serving coffee had lost everything because of his family's company, possibly on his father's direct orders. And now, a decade later, their paths had crossed just as Robert prepared to launch Project Prometheus, a water management initiative that would affect the same watershed Thomas Hayes had fought to protect. The coincidence seemed too perfect. Was it possible Emma had sought employment at Capital Cafe specifically to monitor Apex activities? Was her presence there deliberate, a decade-long pursuit of justice or revenge? His intercom buzzed, reminding him of the board meeting starting in 5 minutes. Robert gathered his presentation materials mechanically, his mind still processing the horrifying possibilities. The board meeting passed in a blur of projections and strategic initiatives. When CFO Victor Reynolds questioned the additional environmental monitoring expenses, Robert found himself defending the measures with unexpected passion. The additional monitoring isn't just about regulatory compliance, he heard himself saying. It's about corporate responsibility. We can't afford another Flint, Michigan situation. Environmental theater costs money, Robert. Victor countered, his voice carrying the weight of his 59 years and decades of corporate battle scars. Money that comes directly from shareholder returns. And environmental disasters cost more, Robert replied sharply, both in dollars and human lives. The uncharacteristic intensity of his response drew curious glances from several board members. Victor studied him with narrowed eyes, clearly sensing something had changed in the younger CEO's approach. After the meeting, Robert retreated to his office and pulled up his father's digital archives. Hours passed as he dug through historical files, cross-referencing dates and names. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Thomas Hayes had filed 17 separate reports documenting contamination from Apex's operations. When Hayes persisted despite losing his job, the corporate response had escalated. Internal security reports referenced surveillance of Hayes and his family. The final security report was dated the day before the fatal accident, noting that subject continues to compile evidence for potential federal whistleblower filing. No documents explicitly ordered Hayes' death, but the timing and circumstances were damning, especially combined with his father's handwritten note about resolving the situation completely. Robert closed his computer as darkness fell over Washington. The weight of potential complicity in murder settled over him like a physical burden. Everything he thought he knew about his father and the company that bore their family name had been called into question. The next morning, Robert returned to Capital Cafe earlier than usual. Marcus was at his regular table, but Emma hadn't started her shift yet. Robert approached the former soldier directly. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Marcus studied him with military assessment before nodding once. "I can't sign fluently," Robert explained, "but I'm told you can read lips exceptionally well." Marcus nodded again. "Military training. What do you want, Chandler?" "To talk about Emma and about her parents. Why planning to finish what your father started?" The hostility in Marcus's voice was unmistakable. "No, I want to help her find the truth." Robert met Marcus's gaze directly. "I've found evidence suggesting Apex was involved in her parents' death. I want to make it right." Skepticism radiated from Marcus. "Rich men with guilty consciences are dangerous. Emma's been through enough. This isn't about guilt. It's about justice. For her parents and for the communities still at risk from Apex operations." Pretty words from the CEO who profits from those operations. Robert leaned forward. "I've spent the last 2 days discovering my father may have ordered the murder of innocent people to protect corporate profits. Everything I thought I knew about him, about my family legacy, has been called into question. I need to know the truth as much as Emma does." Before Marcus could respond, Emma entered the cafe. She froze momentarily upon seeing Robert at Marcus's table before approaching with cautious steps. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between them. Marcus signed something to her that Robert couldn't follow. Emma's expression hardened as she turned to Robert. "Whatever you're trying to do, I'm not interested," she said firmly. "Your company took everything from me. You can't fix that with apologies or money." "I'm not offering either," Robert replied. "I'm offering partnership in finding the truth." I've discovered documents suggesting my father may have been involved in what happened to your parents. But there's more to uncover, and I have the access to find it. Why would you help expose your own company's crimes? Emma's suspicion was palpable. Because I won't lead a company built on murder. Because if Apex killed your parents, those responsible should face justice regardless of the consequences to me personally. Emma exchanged a look with Marcus, some silent communication passing between them. I don't trust you, she said finally. This could easily be a ploy to find out what evidence I've gathered over the years. I understand your suspicion, but consider this: I could have buried what I found. Instead, I'm here offering to help expose the truth, knowing it could destroy my family's company and legacy. Words cost nothing, Emma countered. Then let me prove it with actions. Robert reached into his jacket and withdrew a flash drive. This contains everything I've found so far about your father's conflict with Apex and the security measures taken against him. Review it with whatever experts you trust. Emma stared at the flash drive, conflict evident in her expression. If this is genuine, it's potentially evidence of criminal conspiracy. I'm aware of the implications. Marcus signed something to Emma, his expression grave. She responded with rapid signs before turning back to Robert. Why now? After 10 years, why suddenly develop a conscience? Robert considered his answer carefully. Because 10 years ago, I was a college student who knew nothing about corporate politics or environmental crimes. Now I'm CEO responsible for everything Apex does. And because Project Prometheus, our newest initiative, threatens the same watershed your father died trying to protect, I won't compound past crimes with new ones. I need to start my shift. We can continue this discussion later. She hesitated, then took the flash drive. I'll look at this, but it changes nothing between us. I understand. Robert stood to leave. I'll be at the Riverside Memorial Cemetery tomorrow at noon. If you want to continue this conversation, meet me there. Why the cemetery? Emma asked, suspicion returning to her voice. Because that's where your parents are buried, Robert said quietly. And if I'm going to help you find justice for them, I should pay my respects first. As he walked out of Capitol Cafe into the bright Washington morning, Robert understood he had just taken an irrevocable step. By sharing evidence of Apex's potential crimes, he had committed to a path that would likely destroy his career, damage his family name, and potentially lead to criminal prosecutions of people he had worked alongside for years. But for the first time since discovering the dark truth behind his family's success, he felt the weight of complicity beginning to lift. Whatever happened next, he had chosen truth over power, justice over legacy. And in the corporate towers of Apex Energy, Victor Reynolds was already making calls to trusted associates, alerting them that Robert Chandler had become a problem that would need to be managed very carefully. Riverside Memorial Cemetery stretched across gently rolling hills overlooking the Potomac. Robert arrived early, a bouquet of white lilies in hand. He'd researched the location of the Hayes graves and made his way through the cemetery with purposeful steps. Their headstones were modest compared to the elaborate monuments surrounding them. Side by side, simple granite markers bore their names, dates, and a shared epitaph: they fought for a better world. Standing before their graves, Robert felt the weight of responsibility press down upon him. Thomas Hayes had died trying to protect communities from Apex's environmental negligence. Elizabeth Hayes had devoted her life to breaking down communication barriers. Both had been silenced to protect corporate profits, likely on his father's direct orders. I'm sorry, Robert said quietly to the headstones, for what my family took from you, for the justice you've been denied. Words mean nothing to the dead. Robert turned to find Emma standing several yards away, Marcus at her side. She wore simple black jeans and a navy sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her expression was guarded, but the sight of Robert at her parents' graves had clearly unsettled her. Maybe not, Robert acknowledged, but acknowledging the truth is where justice begins. Emma approached slowly, her eyes moving between Robert and the graves. You actually came. I said I would. Men in your position say many things they don't mean. She gestured to the flowers in his hand. Those aren't necessary. They're a sign of respect. Robert placed the lilies between the graves. For two people who deserved much better than what my family's company gave them. Marcus hung back his stance, protective, as he watched their interaction with military alertness. Emma moved to stand directly beside her parents' headstones, one hand resting lightly on her mother's marker. I reviewed your files, she said finally. If they're authentic, they confirm what I've suspected for years. They're authentic, Robert confirmed. I pulled them directly from secure archives only accessible at CEO level. Emma studied him with penetrating intensity. Why are you really doing this? What do you gain from exposing your own company's crimes? Peace of mind, a chance to rebuild something honorable from the wreckage. Robert met her gaze without flinching. What happened to your parents was wrong. Helping expose the truth is the right thing to do, regardless of personal cost. The right thing? Emma repeated skeptically. Do you have any idea what your company's right things cost me? After my parents died, I spent 5 years bouncing between foster homes. I lost my college scholarship because I couldn't maintain my grades while grieving. Everything I've achieved has been despite what Apex took from me, not because of it. I can't undo what happened, Robert acknowledged, but I can help ensure those responsible face consequences and that Apex doesn't continue causing harm. You expect me to believe the CEO of Apex Energy suddenly developed a conscience about profits versus people your entire industry exists to extract resources at any cost. People can change when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Robert gestured to the graves. Your father was trying to protect communities from benzene contamination. Now I've discovered Apex is planning a new project that threatens those same watersheds. I won't be complicit in continuing that legacy of destruction. Marcus stepped forward, signing something to Emma. She nodded before responding in ASL. Their silent exchange continued for several moments before Emma turned back to Robert. Marcus thinks you might be sincere but potentially naive about what you're up against, she translated. He says corporate structures are designed to protect themselves even against CEOs who develop inconvenient ethics. Robert nodded. He's right. I already suspect Victor Reynolds is mobilizing against me, but I have advantages he doesn't anticipate, including access to records he believes were destroyed years ago. Victor Reynolds, Emma repeated, her expression darkening. He was your father's right hand, wasn't he, head of operations when my father was investigating Apex? Yes, and now he's CFO with significant board influence. He's been pressuring me to fast-track Project Prometheus despite environmental concerns. Emma exchanged another look with Marcus. We should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Too many ears in public places. They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in Alexandria, far from Capital Cafe, and the political circles that frequented it. Once they had settled with their drinks, Emma placed a worn leather notebook on the table. I've been collecting information about Apex and my parents' accident for 10 years. Newspaper clippings, interviews with former colleagues, environmental data, anything that might help build a case. She opened the notebook, revealing meticulously organized notes and timelines. My father documented everything. He taught me the importance of evidence. The night before he died, he told me he had proof Apex was deliberately contaminating groundwater to save on proper disposal costs. Did he say what the proof was? Robert asked. Water testing data and internal emails from an Apex whistleblower. Emma's voice tightened. He was going to meet with a federal prosecutor the day after the accident happened. The documents were never found. Marcus signed something and Emma nodded before continuing. The police investigation concluded the crash was caused by brake failure. Mechanical, not suspicious. But my father had just had the car fully serviced 2 weeks earlier. Robert processed this information. The timing aligns with my father's directive to resolve the Hayes situation completely, and with payments to Blackwater Solutions. Blackwater Solutions. Emma leaned forward. That wasn't in the files you gave me. I found it afterward. A security contractor that received 3 payments from Apex authorized directly by my father. The company dissolved shortly after your parents' accident. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed rapidly before showing the screen to Emma. Her expression hardened. Marcus says Blackwater Solutions was a known cover for ex-military contractors who specialized in problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. They operated on the edges of private security, taking jobs most legitimate firms would refuse. The implications hung heavily in the air. Robert had suspected his father's involvement, but confirmation that he had hired professional killers was still devastating. What exactly is Project Prometheus? Emma asked, changing direction. You mentioned it threatens the same watersheds my father was trying to protect. Robert hesitated briefly before deciding complete transparency was essential. It's a massive water rights acquisition and management system. Apex is purchasing land throughout the Virginia watershed to control water access for the next 50 years. The environmental impact assessment shows potential contamination risks to groundwater, but Victor and the board want to proceed anyway. The profit potential is enormous. And the human cost, Emma challenged, potentially thousands exposed to contaminated water, but all perfectly legal due to regulatory loopholes and political connections. Marcus signed again in his movements sharp with evident anger. He says it's the same playbook, Emma translated, just more sophisticated than what they did 10 years ago. Robert nodded grimly. The corporate strategy hasn't changed, just the packaging, which is why stopping it is so important beyond that even finding justice for your parents. Emma studied him intently. What exactly are you proposing? What's your plan? First, gather conclusive evidence about your parents' death. I can access records and individuals you can't. Second, build a case documenting the environmental crimes Apex has committed and plans to commit with Project Prometheus. Then take everything to federal prosecutors. You're talking about destroying your own company, Emma pointed out. Your inheritance, your career, your family legacy. Some legacies aren't worth preserving. Robert's voice hardened. I won't continue profiting from death and destruction, no matter the personal cost. Marcus signed something to Emma that made her expression soften slightly. What did he say? Robert asked. He said that sounded like something my father would have said. Emma closed her notebook. If we do this, we do it my way. No corporate cover-ups, no settlements, no quiet resignations. Full public accountability. Agreed, Robert said without hesitation. Complete transparency. And you need to understand what you're risking, Emma continued. Victor Reynolds and his allies won't just accept your betrayal. They'll come after you with everything they have. Legal action, character assassination, maybe worse. I know. I've already moved significant personal assets beyond corporate reach and secured copies of key documents outside Apex systems. Marcus signed a question to Emma. He wants to know if you have considered that Reynolds might already be monitoring your activities. She translated. Corporate espionage is standard practice at your level. The thought had occurred to Robert, but hearing it stated so bluntly was sobering. It's possible, which is why I've been careful about digital footprints. But we should assume he's suspicious. Their planning continued for another hour, establishing secure communication protocols and dividing responsibilities. Emma would continue gathering historical evidence about her parents' case. Marcus would leverage his military intelligence background to investigate Blackwater solutions and potential witnesses. Robert would focus on internal Apex documents and potential allies within the company. As they prepared to leave, Emma fixed Robert with an intense gaze. One last question. What happens if we find definitive proof your father ordered my parents' murder? The question landed like a physical blow, though Robert had been anticipating it. Then he faces justice even posthumously, and I acknowledge that my family fortune is built on blood money. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. We start tomorrow. The following morning, Robert arrived at Apex headquarters earlier than usual. The executive floor was still quiet, giving him privacy as he accessed the secure document room. Using his authorization codes, he began downloading historical board minutes and security reports onto an encrypted drive. As he worked, Robert heard the outer door open. He quickly closed the file browser and inserted a different drive containing budget projections, a plausible reason for his early morning visit to the secure room. Victor Reynolds appeared in the doorway, his expression neutral, but eyes sharp with assessment. Early start today, Robert. Just reviewing the historical budget allocations for environmental compliance. Robert replied smoothly, looking for patterns that might help optimize our approach for Project Prometheus. Victor nodded, though suspicion lingered in his gaze. Dedication to detail is admirable, though I'm surprised to see you focused on historical data rather than the board presentation for tomorrow. Several members have expressed concerns about your proposed environmental monitoring expansions. The past informs the present, Victor. Isn't that what my father always said? Richard was selective about which parts of the past deserved attention, Victor replied meaningfully. He understood that corporate evolution sometimes requires leaving certain chapters firmly closed. The subtext was unmistakable. Victor suspected something about Robert's recent interest in company history. Some chapters refuse to stay closed, Robert countered, especially when they contain lessons we failed to learn the first time. Victor's expression hardened slightly. Be careful about reopening old controversies, Robert. Your position as CEO isn't as secure as you might believe. The board respects your father's legacy, but they're ultimately loyal to shareholder value. Is that a threat, Victor? A friendly observation from someone who has witnessed several leadership transitions. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your father understood that certain compromises are necessary in this business. I would hate to see you undermine his life's work over misplaced idealism. After Victor departed, Robert removed the encrypted drive with hands that weren't entirely steady. The confrontation confirmed his suspicions. Victor was already moving against him, attempting to consolidate board support. Later that morning, Robert received a text from Emma. Fox watching the hen house. Meet at the alternate location. 1 p.m. The alternate location they had established was a public park in Arlington, selected for its open sight lines and multiple exit routes, Marcus's military precautions influencing their planning. Robert found Emma and Marcus already waiting on a bench overlooking the Potomac. Emma's expression was tense, her body language suggesting urgency. We have a problem, she said as soon as Robert sat down. Marcus spotted surveillance on my apartment this morning. Professional, not law enforcement. Marcus showed Robert photos on his phone, zoomed images of a nondescript sedan with two men inside both, with the alert stillness of trained operatives. Could be coincidence, Robert suggested without much conviction. Unlikely, Emma replied, especially after Marcus ran the plates. The vehicle is registered to Phoenix Security Services. Apex's current security contractor. Robert confirmed the implications immediately clear. Victor must suspect something. Marcus signed rapidly to Emma, who nodded before translating. He thinks your confrontation with Reynolds accelerated their timeline. They're worried about what you might know, or what evidence you might have found. Did they follow you here? Robert asked. No, Marcus spotted them early, and we used counter-surveillance measures. Emma's matter-of-fact tone suggested this wasn't her first experience evading unwanted attention. But this changes our approach. If they're watching me, they're definitely monitoring you too. Robert processed this development. I have the board meeting tomorrow where I'm supposed to present the final Project Prometheus proposal. Victor is expecting me to cave on the environmental monitoring requirements. And if you don't, Emma asked, it's a potential flashpoint. If I stand firm against the board's financial interests, it could trigger a confidence vote. Marcus signed something that made Emma's expression darken. What did he say? Robert asked. He said corporate politics might be the least of our concerns if Apex is willing to conduct illegal surveillance. The same people who authorized my parents' murder are still in power. They've done it before they could do it again. The stark assessment landed heavily. Robert had been focused on corporate maneuvering and legal exposure, but Marcus's military perspective brought the physical danger into sharp focus. We need to accelerate our timeline, Robert decided. I have enough documentation now to raise serious questions about Project Prometheus and historic corporate malfeasance. If I present it all to the board tomorrow, it forces everything into the open. That's premature, Emma objected. We don't have definitive proof connecting Apex to my parents' death yet, just circumstantial evidence. But we have solid documentation of environmental crimes and corporate cover-ups, enough to justify a federal investigation which would eventually uncover the rest. Marcus signed something to Emma, who considered before responding in ASL. Their silent conversation continued for several moments before Emma turned back to Robert. Marcus thinks you are underestimating the board's self-preservation instinct. If you present evidence of corporate crimes, they won't thank you for your honesty. They'll close ranks and dispose of you as the threat. I'm counting on it, Robert replied. Their reaction will be telling. Besides, I don't need the full board's support, just enough to create division and prevent unanimous action against me. Emma studied him thoughtfully. You have someone specific in mind. Elaine Montgomery. She joined the board last year, has a background in environmental compliance. She's been quietly supportive of stricter protocols, but careful not to challenge Victor directly. They spent the next hour refining their strategy. Robert would approach Montgomery privately before the board meeting, sharing key evidence about Project Prometheus's environmental risks. As they prepared to leave, Emma handed Robert a small flash drive. This contains everything I've gathered about my parents' accident. Police reports, witness statements, mechanical assessments of the vehicle. It's not conclusive proof of murder, but it establishes a pattern that deserves investigation. Robert accepted the drive, recognizing the trust it represented. Thank you. I'll add it to the evidence file. This doesn't mean I trust you completely. Emma clarified, her expression guarded. But I believe you're sincere about wanting justice, whatever your reasons. Fair enough. The warning proved prophetic. When Robert returned to his penthouse that evening, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Nothing was visibly disturbed, but small details felt off. Items slightly repositioned, the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne. Someone had searched his home. Robert conducted a careful inventory of his possessions. His laptop appeared untouched, but that meant little if professionals had examined it. More concerning was the missing notepad where he jotted preliminary thoughts about evidence against Apex, a careless security lapse on his part. He sent a coded text to Emma warning of the security breach, then methodically checked for surveillance devices using a scanner he'd purchased after their first meeting. Robert spent a restless night reviewing the evidence and preparing for the board confrontation. By morning, he had formulated his approach and secured his most critical documentation in locations Victor and his allies couldn't access. The Apex boardroom occupied the top floor of their headquarters with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering commanding views of the Washington skyline. Robert arrived 30 minutes early, finding Elaine Montgomery already present reviewing documents with focused intensity. Mrs. Montgomery, thank you for agreeing to meet early. Your message suggested urgency, she replied neutrally. Though requesting a private meeting immediately before a contentious board session is unusual protocol. These are unusual circumstances. Robert placed a folder on the table. I've discovered information about Project Prometheus that changes the risk assessment considerably. Information that Victor Reynolds has deliberately withheld from the board. Montgomery's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her composure. That's a serious accusation against our CFO. One I can substantiate. Robert opened the folder, revealing data tables and impact assessments. These are the complete environmental projections for Project Prometheus, not the sanitized version in your board packet. The contamination risks are significantly higher than reported, particularly regarding benzene leaching into groundwater. Montgomery studied the documents with practiced efficiency, her expression growing more concerned as she processed the information. These projections indicate potential exposure for thousands of residents. Yes, and there's more. Robert turned to the second section of the folder. This is historical data showing a pattern of similar contamination from Apex operations, including incidents that were deliberately covered up. Her attention sharpened. Covered up, how? Legal intimidation of whistleblowers, falsified testing data, strategic campaign contributions to regulatory officials. Robert met her gaze directly. And in at least one case much worse. Montgomery closed the folder, her expression troubled but measured. Why bring this to me specifically, Robert? Because I believe you actually care about corporate ethics beyond the mission statement platitudes. Because your environmental compliance background means you understand these risks better than anyone else on the board. And because I need an ally if I'm going to change Apex's direction. She considered him thoughtfully. You realize what you're proposing would significantly impact quarterly projections. The board has fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders. I also believe shareholders deserve to know if their dividends come from poisoning communities and silencing whistleblowers, Robert countered. The litigation exposure alone, should these practices become public, would devastate share value. Are you threatening to make this public if the board doesn't support your position? I'm suggesting there's an opportunity to correct our course voluntarily before external forces compel us to do so. The evidence exists, Mrs. Montgomery. It will eventually come to light with or without my involvement. She studied him with the calculating assessment of someone who had navigated corporate politics for decades. Your father had a very different approach to these matters. I'm not my father, Robert replied simply. No, you're not. Montgomery returned the folder to him. I'll need time to verify these findings independently. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Then I'll have to make a preliminary judgment based on the evidence presented. She straightened her papers decisively. I suggest you prepare for significant resistance, particularly from Victor. He's been consolidating board support all week. I'm aware. Are you also aware he's been suggesting you're experiencing psychological difficulties? Stress-induced paranoia was the specific term I heard mentioned. The information wasn't entirely surprising, but hearing it confirmed was still jarring. Victor was laying groundwork to discredit Robert completely. Thank you for the warning, Robert said quietly. As other board members began arriving, Robert took his position at the head of the table, organizing his presentation materials while observing the subtle dynamics at play. Victor entered last, accompanied by two senior vice presidents who served on the board. His confident stride and easy manner projected absolute certainty in his position. He nodded cordially to Robert, though his eyes remained coldly assessing. Good morning, everyone. Robert began once all 12 board members were seated. Today's primary agenda item is final approval of Project Prometheus. However, before we proceed, I need to address serious concerns about the project's environmental impact assessment and regulatory compliance projections. Victor shifted forward slightly. We've already thoroughly reviewed the environmental considerations, Robert. The board packet contained complete documentation. Not complete, Robert countered, activating the room's presentation system. Significant data was omitted from your packet's datum that materially changes the risk assessment. The screen displayed the same contamination projections he had shown Montgomery. These are the actual projected benzene exposure levels for residential areas near our planned operations based on our own geological surveys. Murmurs spread around the table as board members registered the discrepancy between these numbers and what they had previously reviewed. There must be some mistake, offered Bradford Willis, a longtime board member and friend of Robert's father. These projections are significantly worse than what we approved in committee. No mistake, Robert replied. These are Apex's own internal assessments, deliberately excluded from the materials provided to the board. Victor's expression hardened. That's a serious allegation, Robert. As CFO, I personally reviewed all materials distributed to the board. Yes, you did, Robert agreed, which raises the question of why these projections were omitted. The tension in the room escalated noticeably. Several board members exchanged concerned glances, while others studied the projection data more closely. Even if these projections are accurate, Victor countered smoothly, they represent worst-case scenarios, not operational expectations. Our engineering team has designed containment systems that significantly mitigate these risks. The same containment systems that failed at our Virginia facility 10 years ago. Robert changed the display to show historical data. When benzene levels in local wells reached 400 times the legal limit, now the board's reaction was unmistakable, a collective intake of breath and shifting postures that revealed their surprise. This was clearly information most of them had never seen. Ancient history, Victor dismissed. Isolated incidents from a different regulatory environment. Not isolated, Robert countered. Part of a pattern of environmental negligence and cover-ups that continues to this day. A pattern that exposes Apex to enormous liability and reputational damage. Victor's facade of calm professionalism began to crack. This is absurd. You're presenting selective data to undermine a project you personally opposed from the beginning. I'm presenting complete data so the board can make fully informed decisions, Robert corrected, something you've deliberately prevented by withholding critical information. Elaine Montgomery spoke up, her voice measured but authoritative. I find the discrepancy between these projections and our board materials deeply concerning. At minimum, it warrants postponing the Prometheus approval until we can independently verify all environmental assessments. Victor turned toward her, barely concealing his anger. Delays cost money, Elaine. Significant money. We have investors expecting this project to proceed on schedule. And we have legal obligations to make decisions based on complete and accurate information, she countered. Information that appears to have been deliberately withheld. The boardroom dynamics were shifting visibly now, the previously solid block of Victor's supporters showing signs of uncertainty. Robert pressed his advantage, changing the display again. Beyond the immediate concerns with Project Prometheus, I've discovered evidence of systematic environmental violations and cover-ups spanning at least a decade, including potential criminal liability related to the harassment and subsequent death of environmental scientist Thomas Hayes and his wife in 2015. Victor surged to his feet. This is outrageous. You're suggesting the company was involved in the death of a former employee. Hayes wasn't an employee, Robert corrected. He was an environmental inspector investigating contamination from our Virginia facility. And yes, I have evidence suggesting Apex under previous leadership may have been involved in silencing him permanently. The boardroom erupted into chaos, members talking over each other as they processed this explosive allegation. Bradford Willis pounded the table for order. These are criminal accusations, Robert, against your own father's administration of this company. Have you taken leave of your senses? I've found my conscience, Robert replied evenly, an evidence that cannot be ignored. Victor had recovered his composure, his expression now cold with calculation. I think we've heard enough to understand the situation. Robert is clearly experiencing some kind of psychological crisis. His behavior has been increasingly erratic for weeks, culminating in these paranoid fantasies about corporate conspiracy. He turned to address the full board. As CFO and longest-serving executive, I reluctantly suggest we invoke the emergency succession protocol. Robert is clearly unfit to continue as CEO if he's making unfounded criminal accusations against the company and his own father. Several board members nodded in agreement, but others appeared uncertain, looking between Robert and Victor with growing concern about the schism unfolding before them. Montgomery spoke up again. Before we take such a drastic step, we believe Robert deserves the opportunity to present his evidence in full. Invoking emergency succession without due process would expose us to potential litigation. This isn't a court of law, Elaine, Victor countered. It's a business decision. Robert's behavior threatens shareholder value and company stability. Transparency threatens nothing except corruption. Robert responded, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. I'm prepared to present complete documentation of everything I've alleged. Documentation that will be made public regardless of any action this board takes today. The implied threat hung in the air. Victor's expression darkened as he recognized Robert had prepared contingencies. Are you blackmailing the board, Robert? I'm ensuring the truth comes to light one way or another. Robert surveyed the room, meeting each board member's gaze directly. You all have a choice. You can help reform Apex into a company that prioritizes ethical operations alongside profit, or you can continue enabling criminal behavior until external investigations force change upon us. Bradford Willis cleared his throat. I move we take a brief recess to consider these developments privately. This situation has escalated beyond a normal board discussion. The motion carried quickly, board members eager for a moment to process the shocking allegations and confer with allies. As they filed out, Victor remained behind, approaching Robert with barely contained fury. You're destroying everything your family built, he hissed. And for what? Some misguided moral crusade? For justice, Robert replied simply, something Apex has avoided for too long. Victor leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. You have no idea what you're doing. The people you're involving yourself with, the forces you're challenging. This goes beyond corporate politics, Robert. Are you threatening me, Victor? Warning you, there are consequences to betraying your own kind. Consequences your new friends won't be able to protect you from. Before Robert could respond, Victor straightened and walked away, rejoining his closest allies among the board. Robert immediately texted Emma, board confrontation in progress. Victor moving to remove me as CEO. Prepared to release evidence package to DOJ, contact if necessary. Her reply came seconds later. Standing by, be careful. M says corporate coups often turn violent when billions at stake. The warning resonated uncomfortably with Victor's thinly veiled threat. Robert had anticipated corporate maneuvering and legal countermeasures, but the potential for physical danger seemed increasingly real. The same people who had arranged the accident that killed Emma's parents might well consider similar solutions to the problem he now represented. As the board members filed back in, Robert could read the outcome in their expressions. The divisions had hardened with Victor's faction clearly in the majority. Bradford Willis took the lead, his expression grave. After consultation, the board has decided to temporarily relieve you of CEO duties pending a full evaluation of your allegations and mental state. Victor Reynolds will serve as interim CEO effective immediately. Robert had expected this outcome, but the reality still landed with crushing force. And my evidence will be reviewed by outside counsel. Willis assured him, though his tone suggested skepticism. If credible concerns are identified, appropriate action will be taken. Outside counsel selected by Victor, I presume, Robert challenged. By the governance committee. Willis clarified, though everyone knew Victor controlled that committee through proxy relationships. Robert gathered his materials calmly despite the turmoil he felt. For the record, I protest this action and reserve all rights to pursue legal remedies. I also formally request whistleblower protection under federal statutes as I've presented evidence of potential criminal activity. Victor smiled thinly. Always the careful lawyer, Robert. Rest assured your evidence will receive the attention it deserves. The implication was clear: it would be buried as quickly and thoroughly as possible. As Robert prepared to leave the boardroom, Elaine Montgomery approached him. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Some of us take these allegations seriously. I've secured copies of your presentation materials." "Thank you," Robert replied, genuinely surprised by her initiative. "Be careful, they'll come after anyone who supports me." "I've survived worse," she assured him, "though you might want to watch your back." Victor doesn't respond well to challenges. The warning echoed Marcus's concerns. As Robert left Apex headquarters, security guards watching his departure with uncomfortable intensity, he realized his life had fundamentally changed. He had sacrificed his position, likely his fortune, and possibly his safety in pursuit of justice for Emma's parents and protection for countless others threatened by Apex's operations. As he reached his car, his phone chimed with a message from Emma. "News of your removal already hitting financial wires. Meet at emergency location. Critical development." The emergency location was a small law office belonging to a trusted friend of Marcus, selected because it had secure communications and private access. Robert arrived to find Emma and Marcus already waiting, tension evident in their postures. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "Someone broke into my apartment while I was out," Emma replied, her voice tight with controlled fear. "They tore the place apart looking for something. My research, presumably." "Did they find it?" She shook her head. "I've kept everything important in secure locations since my parents died. But they left a message." She handed him her phone, displaying a photograph of her apartment wall where someone had spray-painted 3 words, "Stop or die." Robert stared at the image on Emma's phone, the crude threat spray-painted across her apartment wall, sending an icy chill through his body. The stark black letters against the white wall left no ambiguity about the sender's intentions. "This changes everything," he said, looking up from the phone. "We need to contact law enforcement immediately." Emma shook her head. "And tell them what?" "That we suspect a multi-billion-dollar corporation orchestrated my parents' deaths 10 years ago and is now threatening me. Without conclusive proof, we'll be dismissed as conspiracy theorists." "The break-in itself is a crime," Robert countered. "The threat is explicit." Marcus signed rapidly to Emma, his expression grave. "Marcus says involving police now would alert Apex that we're scared," Emma translated. "They would know their intimidation is working. Plus, Victor likely has connections in local law enforcement. We could be painting targets on our backs." "At minimum, you can't return to your apartment," Robert insisted. "Already handled," Emma replied. "I packed essentials before coming here." Marcus arranged a safe house through military contacts. "What about you?" she added, studying Robert with concern. "You've just been ousted from your company. Your security detail answers to Victor now." "I have resources," he assured them. "Properties not connected to Apex Security Systems contingency plans." "Not enough," Marcus typed on his phone, showing the screen to Robert. "These people killed before. They'll do it again to protect billions." "We need to accelerate our timeline," Robert decided. "Victor will move quickly to contain the situation now that he's interim CEO. Any evidence still at Apex headquarters will likely be destroyed within days, if not hours." Emma opened her laptop, revealing a comprehensive digital workspace with multiple folders labeled by date and subject. "I've been preparing for this moment for 10 years, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Everything I've gathered about Apex, my parents' accident, and the environmental impact of their operations is organized and ready for submission." "But we still lack the smoking gun," Robert pointed out. "Something that definitively ties Apex to your parents' death. Without that, Victor can dismiss everything else as corporate negligence rather than criminal conspiracy." Marcus signed something to Emma, who nodded thoughtfully. Marcus suggests we might find what we need in the security contractor's records, she translated. Blackwater Solutions may have dissolved, but its principals would have kept records if only for leverage against clients. Do we have names for any of these principals? Robert asked. Just one, Emma replied. Gregory Delaney, former military contractor with a questionable service record. He was listed as the company's primary officer before it dissolved. No need, Emma said, turning her laptop toward them. I've been tracking Delaney for years. He runs a private security firm in Maryland under a new name, but it's definitely him. The screen displayed a corporate website for Centurion Defense Solutions, with Gregory Delaney now operating as Greg Daniels, listed as founder and CEO. His photograph showed a hard-faced man in his 50s with military short gray hair and cold eyes. He's built quite the operation, Robert observed, scanning the company details. Government contracts, executive protection, specialized training. Seems he's gone legitimate. Or at least created the appearance of legitimacy, Emma countered. Men like Delaney don't change their nature, just their packaging. Marcus signed something that made Emma nod grimly. Marcus says men with Delaney's background maintain detailed records of every job, especially questionable ones, she translated. Insurance against clients who might consider them expendable. Which means Delaney can't afford any hint of past criminal activity becoming public, Robert concluded. That's our leverage. They developed their strategy over the next several hours. Robert would approach Delaney openly, presenting himself as Richard Chandler's son, seeking to understand his father's business dealings. He would make clear that evidence about Blackwater Solutions' involvement in the Hayes case was already secured and would become public unless Delaney cooperated. Meanwhile, Emma and Marcus would prepare comprehensive evidence packages for submission to the Department of Justice FBI and selected investigative journalists. These packages would be held in secure locations ready for immediate release if anything happened to any of them. This is extremely high risk, Emma cautioned as they finalized the plan. Delaney is trained military. He'll recognize a threat when he hears one. That's what I'm counting on, Robert replied. I want him to understand the seriousness of our position. Men like Delaney respect power and consequences, not appeals to conscience. The following morning dawned gray and drizzling, the weather matching the somber mood as Robert drove toward Baltimore. Centurion Defense Solutions occupied a modern office complex in an industrial area outside Baltimore. The building's unassuming exterior belied sophisticated security measures, Robert noted, as he approached surveillance cameras with tracking capability, reinforced entry points, and subtle defensive architecture throughout the property. Inside the reception area projected professional legitimacy, with corporate awards framed government commendations and sleek modern furnishings. The receptionist regarded Robert with practiced neutrality. I'd like to speak with Mr. Daniels, Robert stated, deliberately using Delaney's new identity, Robert Chandler, to see him. Recognition flickered in her eyes at his name, confirming his suspicion that Delaney would know exactly who the Chandlers were. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Chandler? No, but I believe Mr. Daniels will want to speak with me regarding a matter involving my late father, Richard Chandler. The receptionist made a brief call, speaking too quietly for Robert to hear. After a moment, she nodded. Please wait here. Someone will escort you shortly. Robert took a seat, maintaining outward calm while mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. Through his earpiece disguised as a hearing aid, he could hear Emma and Marcus monitoring from their vehicle parked strategically nearby. Security is extensive, Emma observed through the connection. 4 visible guards, probably more we can't see. Marcus says the building has military-grade systems throughout. Before Robert could respond, a side door opened and a tall man in an impeccable suit approached. Mr. Chandler, I'm James Harrington, Chief of Operations. Mr. Daniels is available to meet you briefly. Robert was led through several secure doors requiring keycard access, each bringing them deeper into Centurion's operations. The hallways were pristine and professional, but Robert noticed the subtle indicators of a facility designed for defense, reinforced door frames, strategic sight lines, multiple exit routes. Finally, they reached Delaney's office, an expansive space with views of the Baltimore harbor. Gregory Delaney, now Greg Daniels, rose from behind his desk as Robert entered. Despite the decades since his Blackwater Solutions days, Delaney's physical presence remained intimidating. Tall and broad-shouldered with the hyper-vigilant posture of someone who had spent years in combat zones, He projected calculated menace despite his business attire. Robert Chandler, Delaney acknowledged, his voice a gravelly baritone. Surprising visit. I heard you're having some troubles at Apex. News travels fast, Robert replied, accepting the offered seat across from Delaney's desk. He noted that Harrington remained in the room, positioning himself near the door in a stance that suggested security training. Corporate drama always does, Delaney responded with a thin smile. What brings Richard Chandler's son to my door? Robert met the man's cold gaze directly. Blackwater Solutions. Specifically the work you did for my father regarding Thomas and Elizabeth Hayes in 2015. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Delaney's expression remained neutral, but a dangerous stillness came over him, like a predator assessing a threat. I don't know what you're talking about, he said flatly. Centurion Defense has never worked with Apex Energy. I'm not talking about Centurion, Robert clarified. I'm talking about your previous operation, the one that received 3 payments totaling $750,000 from Apex during the exact time frame when an environmental scientist investigating Apex contamination died in a suspicious car accident. Delaney leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving Robert's face. That's quite an accusation without evidence, Mr. Chandler, especially from someone recently removed from his company for mental health concerns. I have the evidence, Robert stated calmly. Financial transfers authorized by my father, internal memos regarding the Hayes situation, and technical reports about brake failure consistent with specific sabotage techniques. It was a calculated bluff. They had the financial records and memos, but nothing directly tying Delaney to the mechanical sabotage. Robert was banking on Delaney's reaction revealing more. Even if such evidence existed, Delaney replied carefully, it would implicate your father more than anyone else. Curious that his son would pursue this particular ghost. I'm interested in truth and justice, not protecting family mythology, Robert countered. But I'm not here to debate ethics with you, Mr. Delaney. I want your records regarding the Hayes operation. A cold smile crossed Delaney's face. You seem confused about your position here, Mr. Chandler. You're in my facility making accusations about events a decade past with no leverage whatsoever. I have considerable leverage, Robert corrected. Complete documentation of everything we've discussed has been secured with multiple third parties, programmed for automatic release to federal authorities and media outlets if anything happens to me, Emma Hayes, or our associate. Delaney's eyes narrowed at the mention of Emma's name. The daughter, still pursuing her little vendetta after all these years. The confirmation was implicit but unmistakable. Delaney knew exactly who Emma was and why she would be investigating him. Not a vendetta, Robert replied. Justice for her murdered parents. Justice is a luxury concept for people who've never had to make hard decisions, Delaney said dismissively. Your father understood that business sometimes requires decisive problem solving. Is that what you call sabotaging a car so a man and his wife plunge off a mountain road problem solving? Delaney studied Robert for a long moment, then made a subtle gesture to Harrington, who quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. You're playing a dangerous game, Delaney said once they were alone. Victor Reynolds contacted me yesterday. He suggested you might become problematic and inquired about my availability for consultation. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Victor was already exploring options to silence Robert permanently. That only strengthens my position, Robert replied, refusing to show intimidation. If anything happens to me after this meeting, authorities will know exactly where to focus their investigation. Delaney leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from corporate executive to hardened operative. What exactly do you want from me, Chandler? Your complete records regarding the Hayes operation. Everything you have about the contract, the execution, and any subsequent communications with Apex leadership. And if I provided such hypothetical documentation, what happens then? It becomes part of a comprehensive case against those responsible for the Hayes murders and Apex's ongoing environmental crimes, Robert stated. Your cooperation would be noted in any proceedings. Delaney laughed coldly. You're offering me consideration in exchange for admitting to murder. Not particularly compelling. I'm offering you a chance to avoid being the only one held accountable when everything becomes public, Robert countered. Victor Reynolds is already positioning you as the fall guy. My father is beyond earthly justice, and Victor will ensure all evidence points to you acting independently if this comes to light. A calculating expression crossed Delaney's face. Reynolds always was a snake. Even back then, he made sure his fingerprints were nowhere near the operation. He was involved directly. Robert pressed, sensing a critical revelation. Your father authorized the payments, but it was Reynolds who handled the details. Delaney confirmed, apparently having decided that limited cooperation served his interests. He specified exactly what needed to happen and when. Made it clear the accident needed to eliminate both Hayes and any evidence he might have been carrying. Through his concealed earpiece, Robert could hear Emma's sharp intake of breath at this confirmation of what she'd suspected for years. I want those records, Roberts insisted. All of them. Delaney studied him thoughtfully. You really are nothing like your father. He would never have sacrificed the company for abstract principles. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't intended as one. Delaney stood and walked to a painting on the wall, revealing a concealed safe behind it. Insurance has always been a necessary business expense in my profession. Clients sometimes develop selective memory about what they authorized. He opened the safe and removed a sealed envelope, which he placed on the desk between them. Everything regarding the Hayes operation. Original contract, communication records, technical details, payment, confirmations. I kept it separate from digital systems for obvious reasons. Robert reached for the envelope, but Delaney held it firmly in place. Before you take this, understand what you're doing. Victor Reynolds has powerful friends beyond Apex. Government contacts, intelligence community connections, judges on his payroll. This evidence might not be enough to bring him down. I'll take my chances, Robert replied. Your funeral, Delaney said with a shrug, releasing the envelope. Literally, potentially. As Robert secured the envelope inside his jacket, Delaney added, For what it's worth, I didn't know Hayes had a kid. That wasn't in the briefing materials. Her name is Emma, Robert said as he stood to leave. She grew up in foster care after your operation killed her parents. Remember that when you tell yourself you were just following orders? Delaney's expression remained impassive. We're all following someone's orders, Chandler. Even you. As Robert was escorted back through the building's security checkpoints, Emma's voice came through his earpiece, tense with anticipation. Did you get it? Yes, he confirmed quietly. Direct evidence implicating Victor in ordering your parents' murder. Delaney kept detailed records. Thank God, Emma whispered. Get out of there quickly. Marcus says security is increasing around the perimeter. Robert maintained a measured pace through the lobby, nodding politely to the receptionist as he exited. Once outside, he noted several security personnel who hadn't been present when he arrived, their positions creating a subtle perimeter around the building. Don't react, Emma instructed through the earpiece. Walk normally to your car. We're monitoring all frequencies and detected communications right after you entered Delaney's office. Someone made calls. Robert reached his vehicle without incident, but as he pulled away from Centurion headquarters, he noticed a black SUV edge into traffic behind him. I have a tail, he reported calmly. Black Suburban, 2 occupants. Confirmed, Marcus responded, speaking directly for the first time in their operation. Second vehicle also tracking from eastern approach. Silver sedan. Coordinated surveillance, Emma assessed. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. Proceed to contingency point Delta, Marcus instructed. We'll intercept and provide coverage. The contingency point Delta was a public parking garage near the harbor. Robert entered the structure, paying for a ticket while scanning for the pursuit vehicles. They've split up, Emma reported, one at each exit. They're coordinating to maintain visual contact. Robert drove to the designated level where Marcus waited in a maintenance worker's uniform beside an electrical panel. As planned, Robert parked and quickly transferred the MV open himself to Marcus's maintenance van, while Marcus activated a temporary disruption to the garage's security cameras. Clear for now, Marcus confirmed after several minutes of careful driving. But they'll realize the switch soon. We need to get this evidence secured immediately. Emma was already examining the contents of Delaney's envelope. It's all here, she confirmed, her voice tight with emotion. Contract specifications for the brake line, sabotage communications from Victor authorizing the operation, payment confirmations. Direct evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, Robert observed. Exactly what we needed. And Victor's fingerprints all over it, Emma added. My father was scheduled to meet with federal prosecutors the day after the accident. These documents confirm Apex knew about that meeting. They transmitted the evidence from a secure location using encrypted channels Marcus had established through his military contacts. The submission included everything they had gathered: Delaney's records, Robert's internal Apex documents, Emma's decade of research and comprehensive documentation of Project Prometheus's environmental risks. Confirmation received, Emma announced as the transmission completed. Justice Department Special Prosecutor Catherine Martinez has the complete file. She's requesting an immediate meeting. Smart move, Marcus commented. Electronic evidence can be disputed or buried. Personal testimony adds weight. The meeting was arranged at a federal building in downtown D.C. with security protocols that would prevent any Apex interference. As they approached the location, Robert's phone chimed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Should I answer, he asked Marcus. Speakerphone only. Could be tracking attempt. Robert accepted the call on speaker. This is Chandler. Robert, it's Elaine Montgomery. The board member's voice sounded tense, urgent. You need to be extremely careful. Victor called an emergency board meeting after you left. He's initiated aggressive containment protocols for what he's calling a severe corporate security breach. Meaning what exactly? Meaning he's authorized extraordinary measures to protect Apex from what he describes as corporate terrorism by you and your associates. He has the board convinced you've stolen proprietary information with intent to damage the company. That's his cover story for silencing us, Robert interpreted. Has he mentioned specific actions being taken? Nothing explicit in the meeting, but I overheard him instructing security personnel to locate and secure all parties immediately. The language was concerning enough that I felt compelled to warn you. Thank you, Elaine. This confirms our suspicions. There's more, she added. Victor has convinced the board to expedite Project Prometheus despite the environmental concerns you raised. They've already submitted revised permit applications with falsified impact data, which means they're destroying evidence of the actual environmental risks, Robert concluded, covering their tracks while pushing forward. Exactly. Be safe, Robert. Some of us still believe you're doing the right thing. The line went dead. Emma and Marcus exchanged grim looks. Falsifying environmental impact data is another federal offense to add to the list, Emma noted. But the immediate concern is Victor's extraordinary measures. Standard corporate crisis containment wouldn't include physical threat, Robert reasoned. Montgomery wouldn't have called specifically to warn us unless she believed Victor was authorizing something beyond legal channels. Like the same solution they used for my parents, Emma concluded darkly. They reached the federal building without incident, passing through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a conference room where Catherine Martinez awaited them. In her mid-50s with steel-gray hair and the focused intensity of a career prosecutor, Martinez had built a reputation for successfully prosecuting complex corporate crimes. Mr. Chandler, Ms. Hayes, Mr. Wilson, she greeted them formally. I've reviewed your initial submission. The evidence appears substantive enough to warrant immediate investigation. There's significant urgency to this situation, Robert emphasized. We have reason to believe Victor Reynolds is taking extraordinary measures to prevent this information from becoming public. Martinez nodded. We're already implementing protective protocols. Federal marshals have been assigned, and we're preparing subpoenas for Apex records before they can be destroyed. The company will fight those subpoenas with every legal maneuver possible, Robert warned. I'm counting on it, Martinez replied with a thin smile. Obstruction charges often prove easier to establish than the underlying crimes. Now I need detailed statements from each of you, beginning with Ms. Hayes. For the next several hours, they provided comprehensive testimony detailing everything from Emma's parents' initial discovery of contamination to Robert's recent board confrontation and Delaney's confirmation of Victor's direct involvement. Martinez's team documented everything meticulously, occasionally bringing in technical specialists to verify aspects of the evidence. As evening approached, Martinez concluded their session. Based on the evidence presented, I'm initiating a formal federal investigation into Apex Energy, Victor Reynolds, and all associated parties regarding conspiracy to commit murder, environmental crimes, fraud, and obstruction of justice. How quickly will you move against Victor? Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. He's already demonstrated willingness to use violence. Arrest warrants will be processed immediately, Martinez assured her. FBI teams have been briefed and are preparing to execute simultaneous raids on Apex headquarters and Victor Reynolds' residence first thing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow might be too late, Robert cautioned. Victor knows we met with Delaney. He'll assume the worst and accelerate whatever countermeasures he's planning. Martinez considered this assessment. I can expedite the warrant process, potentially have agents moving within hours. In the meantime, you'll remain under federal protection. As they completed final arrangements with Martinez's team, Robert received another call, this time from an unidentified restricted number. Against security protocol, he answered. You've made a serious mistake, Robert. Victor Reynolds' voice was coldly controlled despite the underlying fury. Involving federal authorities crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. The mistake was yours, Victor. Ordering the murder of innocent people to protect corporate profits. It ends now. Nothing ends, Victor replied with chilling certainty. Men like your father and I built systems designed to endure far greater threats than a conscience-stricken heir and an orphan's revenge fantasy. Federal prosecution isn't a fantasy, Robert countered. Martinez has everything, Victor. Delaney's records, internal Apex documents, witness statements. It's over. Cases disappear, witnesses reconsider, evidence gets compromised. The game is just beginning. Victor's voice lowered to a menacing whisper. You chose your side, Robert. Now you'll learn what happens to traitors. The line went dead, leaving Robert with the unsettling certainty that Victor still believed he could prevail despite the mounting evidence against him. The following morning, federal agents executed simultaneous raids on Apex headquarters and Victor Reynolds' estate. The financial press exploded with coverage as the previously respected energy giant faced unprecedented scrutiny. By afternoon, formal charges had been filed against Victor and several Apex executives for crimes ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to environmental violations and securities fraud. Robert, Emma, and Marcus watched the news coverage from a secure federal location, their emotions complex as justice mechanisms finally engaged after 10 years of cover-ups and denials. They actually arrested him, Emma said quietly, watching footage of Victor Reynolds being escorted from his home in handcuffs. After all this time, I never truly believed it would happen. Martinez built an airtight case, Robert observed. The combination of Delaney's records and the internal Apex documents leaves no room for reasonable doubt. It's not over yet, Marcus cautioned, signing to Emma, who translated for Robert. Men like Reynolds have resources and connections beyond what's visible. The legal battle will be prolonged and vicious. His assessment proved accurate. Over the following weeks, Victor's legal team filed countless motions challenging evidence, jurisdiction, and procedure. Despite being under federal protection, Emma noticed suspicious activity near their safe house on 2 occasions, suggesting Victor's reach extended beyond his legal confinement. 3 months after his arrest, a bombshell story appeared in a major financial publication, Apex Whistleblower Conspiracy: The Revenge Plot Against Victor Reynolds. The article painted Robert as a bitter heir seeking revenge after being passed over for promotion, and Emma as an unstable woman obsessed with conspiracy theories about her parents' accidental death. Most shocking was the claim that Delaney had recanted his statement. They've turned it completely around, Emma said in disbelief as they read the article. And look, they're claiming Delaney has recanted his statement. Robert scanned the piece with growing concern. This matches what Martinez warned us might happen. They've gotten to Delaney somehow. We still have his original documents, Emma pointed out, which they'll claim are forgeries, Marcus typed. Classic counterintelligence. Create doubt, muddy waters. The article was just the beginning. A coordinated media campaign soon followed, with sympathetic outlets questioning the Justice Department's persecution of a respected executive based on flimsy evidence and unreliable witnesses. Despite the coordinated pushback, Martinez appeared determined. Reynolds' strategy is failing, she informed them. Judge Harrington has denied all motions to suppress the evidence. Trial is scheduled for next month, and our case continues to strengthen despite Delaney's apparent reversal. What about Project Prometheus? Emma asked. Temporarily halted, Martinez confirmed. The EPA has revoked all permits based on the falsified environmental data. Additionally, they have initiated a comprehensive review of all Apex operations nationwide with particular focus on water contamination issues. Outside the Justice Department, Robert and Emma walked in companionable silence for several blocks before Emma spoke. What happens when this is all over for you, I mean? Your family company is facing bankruptcy, your family name is associated with murder and corporate crime, and your career and energy is effectively over. Robert considered the question. Strangely enough, I feel more purpose now than I ever did as Apex's CEO. For the first time, my life isn't defined by maintaining and expanding something I inherited. I can build something new, something that actually contributes positively. Like what? I've been thinking about establishing a foundation focused on corporate accountability and environmental protection, using what remains of my resources to support whistleblowers and community advocates fighting against corporate exploitation. Emma smiled, the expression warming her features. My parents would have approved, using Chandler resources to support people like my father instead of silencing them. Would you consider being part of it? Robert asked, his tone carefully casual, despite the importance of her answer to him. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Chandler? Emma asked, her eyebrow raised in mock formality. I'm offering you a partnership, he clarified. Equal authority, shared mission. Your expertise combined with my resources could make a genuine difference for communities facing environmental threats. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from Martinez. There's been a development, the prosecutor said without preamble. Gregory Delaney was found dead in his Baltimore apartment an hour ago. Apparent suicide, though we're investigating. Robert and Emma exchanged alarmed glances. Suicide, Robert repeated incredulously. Gunshot wound to the head, a note claiming remorse over falsely implicating Victor Reynolds. Martinez continued. The timing is beyond suspicious, especially given his recent media statements questioning his original testimony. He was eliminated, Emma said flatly after the call ended. Victor's making sure his main witness can't testify. The investigation into Delaney's death revealed troubling inconsistencies with the suicide scenario, including security camera footage showing unknown individuals entering his building shortly before his estimated time of death. The case against Victor took on new dimensions as potential witness, tampering, and obstruction charges were added. But Victor had one final card to play. 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Elaine Montgomery received an anonymous envelope containing documentation of irregular campaign contributions linked to Judge Harrington, the presiding judge in Victor's case. The implication was clear. Either she used the information to force Harrington's recusal, or Victor's team would leak it publicly, destroying the judge's reputation and potentially derailing the entire case. Montgomery, to her credit, brought the blackmail attempt directly to Martinez rather than succumbing to the pressure. But the damage was done. Harrington was forced to recuse himself, and the trial was reassigned to Judge William Thornton, known for his pro-business leanings. They're systematically undermining every aspect of the case, Emma observed bitterly as they digested this latest setback. First Delaney, now Harrington. What's next? They'll target you, Marcus signed grimly. You're the emotional core of the prosecution's case. Discredit you and the narrative falls apart. The prediction proved accurate. Days later, a devastating expose appeared claiming Emma had fabricated evidence against Apex as part of a years-long vendetta. The piece featured interviews with former colleagues and acquaintances, painting her as obsessed and unreliable. I never said that, Emma insisted, her hands shaking as she read the article. I barely knew this woman. We shared an apartment for 3 months during my sophomore year. She was probably paid, Robert said, or threatened. This has Victor's fingerprints all over it. The onslaught continued. Anonymous online accounts began posting doctored photos purporting to show Emma wumping with anti-corporate extremist groups. Her professional reputation was systematically dismantled through coordinated social media campaigns. Despite Martinez's assurances that character assassination wouldn't affect the legal proceedings, the cumulative pressure began taking a visible toll on Emma. The vibrant determination that had sustained her through a decade of seeking justice wavered under the relentless attacks. One evening, after a particularly vicious news cycle, Robert found her alone on the rooftop of their secure building, staring out at the Washington skyline with red-rimmed eyes. Maybe they've won, she said quietly as he joined her. Even if Victor goes to prison, they've destroyed everything I've built. My reputation, my credibility, my future. They haven't won, Robert insisted gently. This is exactly what they want for you to give up to doubt yourself. What if some of it's true? Her voice cracked slightly. What if this has been about revenge all along? What if I've been so focused on making them pay that I can't see anything else? Robert turned to face her directly. Emma, listen to me, Ma. Wanting justice for murdered parents isn't revenge. It's basic human dignity. You didn't fabricate evidence. You didn't manipulate or deceive. You simply refused to let powerful people bury their crimes. She met his gaze, vulnerability and doubt warring with her natural resilience. When did you become the optimist in this partnership? When a determined waitress with exceptional sign language skills showed me what real courage looks like. He replied, deliberately echoing their early meetings. Emma stepped closer, and for a moment Robert thought she might embrace him. Instead, she squared her shoulders. We finished this, she said with renewed conviction. For my parents, for the communities Apex has poisoned, for everyone who's ever been silenced by corporate power. As the trial date approached, Victor made one final desperate attempt to derail the proceedings. Through intermediaries, he offered a settlement proposal, a substantial personal payment to Emma in exchange for her withdrawing her testimony, plus Robert's reinstatement as Apex CEO with expanded authority. I'm not interested in his blood money, Emma replied firmly. Nor am I in reclaiming a position I no longer want, Robert agreed. Reject the offer, Ms. Martinez. We'll see this through to the end. The trial of Victor Reynolds versus the United States began on a crisp autumn morning almost exactly 1 year after Robert had first spilled coffee on his Apex documents at Capitol Cafe. Despite Delaney's death and Judge Thornton's business-friendly reputation, the prosecution presented a devastating case. Emma's testimony proved the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. For 6 hours, she recounted her parents' lives, her father's discoveries about Apex's contamination, and the decades she'd spent piecing together evidence of corporate murder. Despite aggressive cross-examination attempting to portray her as unstable and vindictive, she maintained composure and credibility. My father believed corporations should be held to the same standards as individuals, she concluded. That power doesn't exempt you from basic human decency. That profit never justifies destroying lives. Robert's testimony followed methodically outlining how he discovered his family company's involvement in murder, the evidence he'd gathered from internal archives, and Victor's efforts to silence him when he raised concerns. The jury deliberated for 7 days in eternity that left Emma, Robert, and Marcus in anxious limbo. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom fell silent as the foreperson rose. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant, Victor Reynolds, guilty. The remaining verdicts followed in succession, guilty on environmental crimes, fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Victor's expression remained impassive, but the slight slump of his shoulders revealed the impact as his carefully constructed empire of influence crumbled around him. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Thornton surprised observers by imposing the maximum penalty, 30 years without possibility of parole, plus financial restitution to affected communities. The court cannot restore lives lost to corporate violence, Thornton stated, but it can ensure that those who place profit above human life face consequences commensurate with their actions. The verdict and sentence sent shockwaves through corporate America. Overnight, environmental compliance officers gained newfound authority within their organizations. Whistleblower hotlines saw record activity as employees reported violations previously considered standard business practice. For Emma, the outcome brought complex emotions rather than simple closure. Justice had been served, but her parents remained gone, their absence a permanent void in her life. The vicious media campaign had left reputational scars that would take time to heal. Yet alongside the lingering pain was something new, a sense of purpose beyond revenge, a vision for meaningful work ahead. 6 months after Victor's sentencing, the Thomas and Elizabeth Hayes Center for Environmental Justice opened its doors in a renovated historic building in downtown Washington. The center combined legal advocacy, scientific research, and community organizing to support environmental whistleblowers and affected communities nationwide. Robert had committed his remaining fortune to establishing the center, insisting that Emma serve as its executive director. Together, they assembled a team of environmental scientists, legal experts, and community advocates dedicated to holding corporate polluters accountable and empowering affected communities. Marcus led the center's technical operations, developing secure communications protocols for whistleblowers and establishing a digital evidence repository that corporate influence couldn't compromise. His military experience proved invaluable in creating systems resistant to the kinds of attacks that had nearly derailed their own case. Robert and Emma stood together at the podium during the opening ceremony, addressing an audience that included environmental advocates, community representatives, and even several reformed Apex executives who had chosen cooperation with authorities over loyalty to a corrupt system. 10 years ago, Thomas and Elizabeth Hayes died trying to protect communities from corporate environmental crimes. Emma began, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. Today, we honor their sacrifice by continuing their work on a scale they could only have dreamed of. After the ceremony, Robert found Emma standing alone in the center's library, examining a photograph of her parents that had been enlarged and prominently displayed. "They would be incredibly proud of you," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I hope so," she replied. "Sometimes I worry they wouldn't recognize the person I've become. 10 years of focusing on justice shaped me in ways I'm only beginning to understand." "Your focus never wavered," Robert observed, "even when it would have been easier to give up." "I had help," Emma acknowledged, turning to face him. Over the months of working together, their professional partnership had gradually evolved into something deeper, a bond forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and growing affection. The careful distance she had maintained in the beginning had slowly dissolved, replaced by a tentative but unmistakable intimacy. "I never thanked you properly," she continued, "for risking everything to help a woman you barely knew." "You never needed to," Robert replied. "Some debts can't be repaid, only paid forward." Emma studied him for a moment, then made a decision. She stepped closer and took his hand in hers. "We've spent so much time focused on the past that we've barely considered the future." "What do you want that future to look like?" Robert asked, his voice soft with unspoken emotion. "I'm still figuring that out," Emma admitted. "But I know I want you in it, not just as a colleague." Robert's heart quickened at her words. "I've wanted to tell you how I feel for months," he confessed. "But I wasn't sure if it was right, given everything you have been through because of my family. That's exactly why it took me so long to acknowledge what was happening between us," Emma replied. "How could I develop feelings for the son of the man responsible for my parents' death? It seemed impossible and thinkable. And now I understand that you're nothing like your father, that you chose to dismantle everything he built rather than perpetuate injustice, that some legacies aren't worth preserving while others," she gestured around the center, "are worth building even from the ashes of what came before." After Martinez departed, Robert and Emma made their way to the center's rooftop terrace, watching as evening lights illuminated the Capitol dome in the distance. Emma handed Robert a cup of coffee, a ritual that had become meaningful to them both. "1 year ago today, I spilled coffee on you at Capitol Cafe," she observed. "Quite possibly the most consequential coffee accident in corporate history." Robert laughed, accepting the cup. "I'm still not entirely convinced it was an accident. Part of me wonders if some subconscious recognition of my name prompted your uncharacteristic clumsiness." "I'll never tell," Emma replied with a smile that reached her eyes. In the years since their first meeting, the wariness that had once shadowed her expression had gradually receded, replaced by a cautious optimism neither of them had anticipated. "To new beginnings," Robert said, raising his cup in a simple toast. "And to unexpected partnerships," Emma added, touching her cup to his before leaning in to kiss him softly. As they stood together overlooking the city, where power had so long been wielded to protect corporate interests over public welfare, both felt the weight of responsibility and the promise of potential change. The center represented not just institutional reform, but personal transformation, proof that even the darkest legacies could be redeemed through conscious choice and determined action. Emma eventually returned to Riverside Memorial Cemetery, with Robert bringing flowers to her parents' graves, not in grief, but in gratitude. "I think I've finally understood what they were trying to do," she told him as they stood before the simple headstones. "It wasn't just about one company or one contaminated watershed. It was about believing people deserve better than what powerful interests decide they're worth. That's the legacy we're building now," Robert replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Not just holding my father's company accountable for past crimes, but creating systems that prevent future ones." 1 year after the center's opening, they returned to Capitol Cafe together, their first visit since the day Robert had approached Marcus about helping Emma. The cafe looked exactly the same, though neither of them was the person they had been when they first met there. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't spilled that coffee?" Emma asked as they sat at what had once been Marcus's regular table. Every day, Robert replied honestly, I'd still be CEO of a company built on exploitation. You'd still be searching for justice alone. And thousands of people would still be drinking contaminated water while Apex collected profits. Emma reached across the table to take his hand. Then I'm glad for clumsy waitresses and coffee stains. The best mistakes are the ones that lead us where we needed to go all along, Robert agreed. As they left the cafe hand in hand, they passed a young server carefully balancing a tray of coffee cups. Emma smiled at her, recognizing the practiced efficiency of someone navigating a world where most people look through rather than at her. The server nodded back, unaware that the couple she had just served had transformed corporate accountability in America, all because of a coffee spill and the courage to pursue truth regardless of consequences.